My name is Matthew Cassel. I am a photographer and a journalist. I grew up Jewish in America, and I support the Palestinian struggle against occupation. My support for Palestinians has made me feel like an outsider in my own community and my family. It's made me question whether it's possible to be both Jewish and a critic of Zionism. I was raised with the narrative of Israel as a dream realized for the Jewish people, a safe haven after the horrors of the Holocaust. But my world changed when I crossed my first Israeli checkpoint. I was 21. It was the second Intifada, and I had never seen war and occupation. That moment had a profound impact on me. I've spent much of the last decade living and working in the Middle East, documenting the Palestinian plight. My journey takes me home to the US to explore what Zionism means in America today and the Jewish community's relationship to Israel. This is Chicago, my hometown, where I grew up. My mom and dad spent several years traveling and teaching in Afghanistan before coming back to raise my sister and me. They divorced when I was a kid, and my mom left Chicago, but my dad still lives here. My dad has had health issues since I was a teenager, but his biggest struggle was being uninsured. Watching him cope with his illness as an uninsured American was one of the things that drew me towards fighting for social change.
These damn chest tubes they put in you. That's what's killing me.
They don't look too comfortable.
Yeah, but except for some problems with my lungs, I feel pretty good.
Yeah? You look a lot better than last time.
Ready to undergo another few heart valve operations. Thousands of people dying all the time around here because they don't have any insurance. You know, and it's not just the money, but it's the psychology that's created. You know, just everything stacked against you.
And the little guy gets screwed?
Yeah. Not an easy country to live in.
Do you feel lightheaded?
Well, yeah.
Should I get the nurse? Should I get Laurel?
No.
My mom raised me with a strong sense of social justice, which for her stems from her Jewish faith. She took me to Hebrew school, and I was bar mitzvahed at 13. These days, I identify as secular, but what I took away from my religious upbringing was the importance of fighting against injustice and standing up for the oppressed. Years later, I applied those lessons to Israel and saw that Palestinians were being denied their rights. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a polarizing issue within the Jewish American community, including within my own family. When my mom saw me at a protest in Chicago, carrying a Palestinian flag, she told me I was no longer her son. We stopped talking. I was devastated to see that politics could become this personal. I went to speak with Ari Hart, who I grew up with in Chicago. Ari is now a modern Orthodox rabbi in New York, and over the years, we have been able to have an open dialogue about the conflict in Israel-Palestine. Ari was preparing for Tisha B'Av, a Jewish holiday that commemorates the destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago.
I think the idea that there's brokenness in the world and that there's brokenness in Israel, that resonates very deeply with me, and that the world is not perfected yet, that there's profound alienation and there's profound exile in the world, and that we need to be working towards fixing that. That's how I resonate with Tisha B'Av.
So this is the library.
Yeah. This is called the Beit Midrash, like madrasa actually.
Yeah.
Like study, house of study.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. During the week it's full of tables, and about 40 people sit in this room and study these books out loud in like a very
Communal learning space. Okay.
Here, we can practice it. You sit face to face with a study partner it's kind of like you almost clash. Like you're supposed to argue, you're supposed to kind of get into it, be like, oh, you think it means this? Well, I think it means this. It's about ideas. It's a fight over ideas. And it's like a holy fight. That kind of debate is a holy thing. There's a famous joke about the mother sends her child off to yeshiva, to the Jewish school. Yeah. And when the child comes home, she doesn't ask, did you get a good grade or did you give a good answer? She asks, oh, did you ask a good question today? Wow. Asking good questions, that's the heart of Jewish education. I think it comes from both the text and also from the experience of being different in a lot of different societies throughout history. I think about Karl Marx and Freud and people who really thought about things from a different perspective than the normal stream at the time. I think that was part of their Jewish experience. You're like an agitator a little bit just because you're kind of different.
Mm-hmm. So you identify as a supporter of Israel, as a Zionist?
Yeah.
Okay. How did you come to that?
I believe in Zionism because I believe that the Jewish people has something unique to offer to the world in terms of ethical and spiritual moral teachings. And I think that the state of Israel is the best thing that's happened to the Jewish people in 2,000 years. It's the greatest opportunity we've had to actualize our highest values.
I think it was really interesting what you were talking about, how kind of, questioning is the essence of Judaism. But that doesn't seem to be happening a lot these days.
Within the Jewish community, there are some sectors of the Jewish community that are more open to questions and some that are less open to those questions. Israel is like a dream, and when a dream gets realized, it's complicated because all of a sudden the dream meets the reality.
I grew up with a similar narrative about this dream being realized in Israel, for the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. But then when I went and actually saw what was going on there is when I saw the other side of it, which is a nightmare, to be quite frank, for the Palestinians on the other end. And all of that just seemed the opposite of the lessons I had grown up with, being raised Jewish.
It's hard to see the suffering of someone who's tried to harm you. It's also hard to hold two narratives. It's hard to hold the narrative of, wow, this was the best thing that happened to my people, and this was like the worst thing that happened to that people. I mean, that's a very difficult place to be in. It feels like you have to choose, And I personally believe it's possible to hold both, and I think there are Jewish leaders and Jews who are able to occupy both narratives, but it's not easy. It's very difficult.
Hey, Lainey, where you at? I'm still close with my sister Lainey. She's a community organizer in the Bronx. I joined her for a protest she was helping to organize in New York. So what's going on here today? Why are these people out here?
Basically protesting the murder of Trayvon Martin.
And what's your role in all of this?
I'm organizing with a ton of people we have out here. We helped put together the call out for this march.
I get profiled by the way that I look, the way that I dress, the way that I talk. We want justice. That's it. Justice.
Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where any one class is made to feel...
Where I live in the South Bronx, it's the poorest congressional district in the United States. You have kids getting harassed regularly, stopped and frisked regularly, brutalized, and in some cases even murdered by the police.
I wanted to talk to Lainey about what she recalled from our Jewish upbringing and what she remembered about my mom disowning me. Yo, yo! Hey. What's up? How you doing? How's it going? What do you remember happening in 2006 when I had a falling out with Mom?
Do we have to talk about this?
Why?
Can you talk about it? Because I really don't want to talk about that.
Can you just talk about what happened?
I feel like I have very little understanding what happened, so.
So what was it like growing up Jewish in Japan?
Meant a lot of bagels and bialys.
That's the only thing that you took away from it. Is the bagels.
Part of it was that I never felt like I related to the religion, but especially as I grew up and started to learn more about the role of Judaism, specifically in the context of Israel, that I felt like it distanced me even further. And I can see a lot of the people around me, a lot of the Jewish folk that I grew up with, they started to have similar feelings.
Some young Jews of my generation, like my sister, have grown disenchanted with Judaism, in part because of its connection with Israel. The Jewish American community is predominantly progressive on social issues, but it's hard to find common ground on the issue of Palestinian rights, because many are unwilling to criticize Israel. I went to the annual Celebrate Israel Day parade in New York to gauge how strong support is for Israel among some in the community. The mayor of New York and other politicians could be seen marching up Fifth Avenue.
Let's hear it for Israel! Land of milk and honey!
Why are you out here?
Because I love Israel. It's a wonderful country with very generous and beautiful people. It's just the best, and I'm just so happy to be here today.
Some people are critical of Israel and its treatment towards the Palestinians and the occupation.
Well, they have to get better educated. Palestinian is a word that was coined years ago. They were Jordanians, they were Syrians, they were not Israelis. You want to help me out here? You're standing by sweating.
Golda Meir said it best, you know, when the Arabs put down their weapons, there'll be peace. When Israel puts down their weapons, there'll be no Israel. There is a Palestinian people, and they do deserve a state of their own, but that has to be done in a way that's going to protect Israel as well.
In his heart, every Jew is a Zionist.
Everyone? There's a lot of Jews who don't identify as Zionists.
In his heart of heart, he's a Zionist.
So why don't you tell me why you're out here?
I'm out here to support the state of Israel. It's my home. God willing, one day I'll make Aliyah there. That's why I'm here, to show my support.
There are two ways to show support. You can either move there and support it directly by living there, or I think it's also Israel's survival a lot of times is dependent upon the support of other nations, such as America.
What about the treatment towards the Palestinians and the occupation?
What about it?
How do you describe what's happening in the West Bank?
From the way I was raised, from my appreciation for the fact that Israel, the entire land of Israel, is the homeland of the Jewish people, I do not view it as occupation.
There is a necessity for a Jewish homeland.
There was a right to a Jewish homeland.
If you look at history, world history.
There's a historical right to a Jewish homeland.
Right.
But how do you justify the creation of a homeland for Jewish people in Israel and the loss of a homeland for another people, the Palestinians?
The homeland?
Was there really a Palestinian state? Refresh my history.
If there was or wasn't a Palestinian state, there was a people who were living there. Is that not right?
There were Palestinians, there were Arabs, there were also Jewish. There were also Jewish people living in the biblical land of Israel.
People understood the complexity of the region, understood that it wasn't just primarily Jews, primarily Arabs. So what did the UN propose? They posed a partition plan.
There's a partition plan. There's a state for them. There's a state for us. We didn't accept.
This is only the second year we've been allowed to march.
Surely you understand oppression. Do you sympathize or empathize with what's happening with the Palestinians who are facing their own kind of oppression then?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have my own friends that are Palestinians.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of guilt about the way they've been managed and the way we've managed ourselves in that situation.
But why do you feel the guilt? You're not Israeli, I take it.
As a Jew, I'm recognizing that as my state. You know, I really do. I mean, I got it like that when I went there. I got it.
Was in the first Israeli army, 1948.
Where were you born?
I was in Hungary.
In Hungary? During the Holocaust?
We emigrated to Israel.
I was in a concentration camp. It stirs me up.
I understand.
I was in a death chamber.
You've been through things I can't imagine. Do you feel today that Jews are saved?
Yes.
Because of Israel?
Yeah, definitely. Whatever the Israeli government is doing, I agree with it 100%.
100%.
100%.
The only people that I found critical of Israel were a small, ultra-Orthodox Jewish group called Naturi Karta.
Down the state of Israel!
They believe that the creation of the State of Israel challenges God's authority.
We know the Holocaust. Our families died. It's in our blood. Yet we're not going to say to God that we're going to turn away from you and say that we don't respect or believe in your protection. It's a Nakba. It's a catastrophe. The concept of oppressing a people, stealing their land, that's antithetical to what Judaism is about.
A Zionist is not a Jew!
The strongest political message of the day came after the parade when right-wing American and Israeli politicians took the stage.
The overwhelming majority of the American people will stand with Israel, whatever it takes.
People tell me we love Eretz Israel. No if, no buts, no maybe. That is pure Zionism. Unconditional support for Eretz Israel, and I want to thank you for that. And people who think about making decisions that will bring Israel back to the 1967 line, I'm telling you here very straightforward. It will not happen. No matter who will be in the White House, no matter who will be in the UN.
At the parade, I saw many people united with fervor for Israel, and it seemed that their support for Israel was strongly connected to their Jewish identity. I felt even more alienated from the Jewish American community. The narrative of Israel, built on the memory of the Holocaust, doesn't leave much room for understanding the Palestinian story. I went to the Museum of Tolerance in New York, part of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, a Jewish human rights organization. I wanted to hear their perspective on the conflict in Israel-Palestine.
The Holocaust happened, but why did it happen? Well, it happened because of hate speech. It happened because of bullying. It happened because of bigotry. It happened to all these terrible things. So our job is to basically educate the next generation of people to not let that happen again. Here you have Power of Images. These are, images that were in advertisements around the U.S. over the last, 200 years. And you'll kind of look at it, well, how does that make people of different race and creeds or colors feel?
Yeah.
Everybody finds something offensive here,
Yeah.
and at some point everyone's like, oh, what's the big deal? It was a funny advertisement. Well, it wasn't funny to everyone.
Then they all raped me one by one. They said I was a black slave.
They handcuffed.
What has become a production line. This video apparently shows extremists of Hamas giving lessons in bomb making.
Can you talk about a little bit what social justice means to the greater Jewish community in the U.S.?
If you go back to the civil rights movement, there were so many Jews that were involved with the African American community. I think social justice has always been something really, really important.
Have you ever tried to take that lens of seeing oppression where it happens and look at it from the Palestinian perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't see it. I don't see it equated with most of the things you see around here. You see Rwanda here, you see Darfur, you see mass killings. I mean, you see Syria where over 100,000 people have been killed.
Right. Well, it's a civil war, but a lot of people do equate it to, let's say, the civil rights movement in this country, where you have an oppressed minority that is struggling for equal rights in the same way that Martin Luther King.
I don't see the comparison at all. I just don't see it.
Is it anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist, to be opposed to the idea of Zionism?
Zionism is almost a difficult term in today's day and age. It was an older term. Now there's a state of Israel. Zionism was this dream to return to Zion. The state of Israel is a fact today. It's a very common thing to say, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-Zionist. And that gets very complicated. If someone believes that that Israel should kind of not be there and those Jews should be wiped off the face of the planet or thrown into the sea, that's not just anti-Zionist. That's anti-Semitic.
I mean, why do you think it's so hard to discuss really Israel in the U.S.?
I don't know. Is it hard?
I have found that it is difficult to talk about Zionism in America, but a growing number of young Jewish Americans are challenging the existing narrative. One of them is my friend, journalist Nora Barrows-Friedman.
It's either like there's no discussion about Zionism, or the discussion is very Zionist in a lot of American Jewish communities. The only elements of anti-Semitism that I've found are actually coming from Zionist organizations. Their attempts to conflate Zionism with Judaism, lumping all Jews into this one vulnerable community, is anti-Semitic. It's generalizing a population that we're all victims, that we're vulnerable, and saying that we need protection by these ultra-nationalist, ultra-right-wing groups.
I flew to Chicago to meet a number of people who I've come to know over the years, and who are actively involved in the debate around Israel-Palestine. One of those people is Kevin Koval, a spoken word artist. Kevin is also the artistic director of Young Chicago Authors, a community center for youth empowerment.
The power of young people to speak the truth to systems that try to devalue their personhood. I think y'all do that better than anyone in the world. Your personhood is the direct resistance to the systems that will demean and devalue and dehumanize you.
Like me, Kevin's concern with human rights has led him to speak out against Israel's occupation. This has put him in direct conflict with his father, a longtime supporter of Israel. Kevin published a book of poems. One of the poems was to his dad.
Explaining myself for my father. This time, Dad, we are on the wrong side of history. I mean Jews who support Israel without question. These are the holy words of imperialists, which is to say madmen, which is to say men who use bulldozers to run over homes and then build new ones, never acknowledging the horror of what happened. There has been ignorant things said of Jews in anger to rekindle our worst fears, but Dad, very plainly, how many Palestinians do you know? We are better than this. We can turn this story right, work together with the many others to counter what is wrong. I know we can. You taught me to do this work, Dad. And I believe you.
Could have written that to my mom if I was only better with my words, though. That's moving, man. I can identify with that.
Thanks.
What motivated you to write that poem to your dad?
I love him, and he's actually like a really sweet and kind man. And he and my mom have taught me a certain sense of justice, and so to see him hold on to these archaic beliefs that he's been taught, you know, just the myth that Israel and America will continue to tell about its own origin. There was a time, I guess around like, you know, the last major incursion into Gaza where we weren't gonna speak, I thought. My dad does not write. He wrote 5 pages of notes that he wanted to tell me, and I wrote him this poem, a letter just to him kind of explaining where it is I was coming from. And I read it to him in the Starbucks, and he read me his piece, and you know, we said it was gonna be, you know, difficult, but I think for whatever reason, like it clicked a little bit.
I went to Kevin's house the next morning to talk to him more about his views and to meet his dad.
So is this where you write? This is where I write, yeah. Being a Jew, you have to have a particular sense of everything. Like if I were to have a bagel that was just baked, I would go crazy. You know what I mean? It's got to be baked and boiled. You know, I went to Hebrew school, I went to Sunday school, I went to Jewish day school for a little. I was bar mitzvahed, but I fought with my rabbi a lot. There was that song that I heard as I was studying for my bar mitzvah, KRS's 1987 song, Why Is That?, which talks about Moses and Abraham being black. I memorized that verse and recited it for my rabbi.
And what did your rabbi say?
He told me to get out of the synagogue. He said that was impossible. And so I knew that there was a power then in saying something that was counter to the dominant narrative.
That's interesting because you have a poem also about at the Passover Seder, and there's a tradition where the youth at the table are encouraged to ask questions.
That's what I thought in part was like the illest thing of Judaism is our desire for debate. And that's the beauty of the tradition. You know, the idea of Midrash, the idea of Talmud, to really wrestle with the meaning of those of these ancient stories that we've been carrying for, you know, nearly 6,000 years.
Do you think that tradition is still alive within the Jewish community in the U.S.?
No, of course not. I mean, if we were to fully embrace that aspect of our own conversations, we would be having more and more public discourse around Israel-Palestine. I've been dismissed from conferences, I've been disinvited, I've been shut down, I've been censored for reading poems. The elders, the teachers will say that Israel was a land without people for a people without land. And my father and my father's generation bought into that myth, that there were no people in Palestine, there were no people in Israel, it was just desert. Right? That's the myth that we tell ourselves to feel good about occupying that land and then kicking people out of their homes.
Kevin Koval's dad came over to discuss how he and his son have differing views on Israel. Why don't you just start by talking about what you wrote to Kevin in that letter that you...
Well, you know, he's done some poetry that to me sounds very anti-Israeli. And a lot of it was just, I just wondered if some of his influence was anti-Semitic, you know. It just seemed to me that what he was saying is that Jews shouldn't be in Israel, and I'm very proud of the state of Israel. I wrote him this letter, and I was ready to just not listen to his poetry anymore and not be involved with him at all in any way, shape, or form because I was so angry, you know. And he wrote me a letter in reply that was a good answer to what I had written. I wasn't aware of the similarities that the Palestinians were going through. He compares that to, you know, what it was like before civil rights here and how we weren't letting African American people vote, have a say-so, go into diners, stuff like that.
Do you think you have an appreciation for why your dad has such a strong attachment to Israel?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it, and there's some resonance post-Holocaust of wanting to be in a land where you are safe. I understand it emotionally, but at what cost? In a lot of ways, I think our home is in the world. Like, I think that part of what it means to be Jewish is to live in diaspora and make the world a better place. I don't know that we need a nation to do that work.
Well, I mean, I see his point of views, but, you know, I see so much good that comes out of that country. I've never been there, but I tend to think it's a little more beautiful now.
Well, because there's like more strip malls?
If I go there and spend some time there, I could probably argue them more, but I think you look at some of even the resort areas where there's beautiful beaches, some of the most beautiful beaches.
They're beautiful beaches. They've been there. They've been there. It's just now Palestinians can't enjoy them.
Well, they should be able to.
I know, but they can't because of Israeli policy. They can't because of America's.
Well, I'm not arguing that.
I know, but I'm saying that's why.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
It's good you guys are able to talk about these issues because I haven't been able to discuss them with my own family. And, you know, my mom stopped talking to me for a while because we had differing views, much like you two.
I think when it comes to somebody like your mom, or my understanding for Kevin is, I always fall back on I'm proud to be an American, unlike him. I fall back on our Constitution, so Kevin has the right to say whatever he wants. Because of his poetry and his stand, he was disinvited by Hillel, who he was like a hero for. You know, how could you censor? Look what Hitler did. He burned books. Now you're doing the same thing. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
As I grappled with questions about faith and identity, I came across the blog of Rabbi Brandt Rosen, who was a strong supporter of Israel and who is now outspoken in defense of Palestinian rights. Surprisingly, he is now the rabbi at the synagogue that I went to growing up.
Yeah, see, as you can see, we're a huge movement. One of the hallmarks of Reconstructionism is that we are very public about our disavowal of the concept of Jews as a chosen people. We did away with the notion of God as the supernatural deity who controls history and human fate, etc., but saw God as a force for good and justice in the world. And so for any one people to say that they are God's chosen more than any other is, if we don't believe that as Americans, you know, then we shouldn't as Jews either. This is the most controversial part of the building.
Why?
You know, a lot of people, when they saw this, they thought Holocaust, which is, you know,
yeah, it's like rubble. I could see maybe some people thinking that.
It has sort of a destruction. Yeah. But to me, I mean, other people totally get it.
To me, it says Gaza.
Right. I always said I would never be a congregational rabbi. There's no way in hell I was going to do that. I was very cynical about synagogues. And at this point, I don't think there's any other congregation in the world that would take a rabbi like me.
What is different about you from other
I do Palestinian
rabbis?
Solidarity work, and I do it as a rabbi and as a Jew. I think it's the most Jewish thing I can do to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. The Israel narrative, it has a religious power for Jews, even Jews who consider themselves secular. There's this religious fervor by which they identify with this narrative. Growing up, Israel and the Zionist narrative has always been central to my Judaism. I've always been very comfortable being a peace activist as an American and protesting against American militarism. But somehow Israel would always be off the hook. I think Gaza really marked the final breaking point for me. It was just a moment.
Gaza when? 2008, 2009?
December 2008, January 2009. Many civilians, including children, were killed. And I just went numb. It was one of those moments where I felt I'm not going to apologize for this anymore. I can't accept this. It's about persecuting Palestinians. And as a Jew, as a rabbi, as a human being of conscience, I just felt I couldn't continue to rationalize it anymore. But of course, the question was a more existential question. Right. It was, well, what do I do now? I mean, can I be a rabbi and say these things? Can I be a Jew and say these things? I was just very honestly sharing my own grief on breaking with this narrative that had been a part of my identity for most of my life.
But what is it about your Jewish faith that compels you to speak out in defense of Palestinian rights?
The central, most sacred story of my faith, the Exodus story, is a story at its heart that demands that we stand with the oppressed and that we call out the oppressor. and that our God is a God who hearkens to the cry of the oppressed and demands that we do the same. Now, if there's anything that's complicated, it's that they're being oppressed by my people, right? That, I admit, is painfully complicated, but that means we need to start unpacking that.
The attacks on September 11th, 2001 were a turning point for me. I became politically active and protested the US wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Through my anti-war activism, I was introduced to the Arab American community. I met Hatem Aboudeya, a Palestinian American and political activist living in Chicago. How many Arabs are there in Chicago?
We think there's 250,000 Arabs in Illinois. The vast majority of them are in Cook County, southwest Chicago, southwest suburbs.
Chicagoland, yeah.
Yeah, 70% of them are Palestinians.
When did they leave Palestine to come here?
But the vast majority came after 1967.
Okay, when Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
The West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, yeah.
Are they happy being here? Do they want to go back? What's the feeling you get from a lot of
listen,
people?
everybody wanted to go back to their homeland. I think most of them still want to go back to their homeland.
Most of those who actually left their homeland. But what about people like you? Who were born and raised here?
Palestinian Americans like being in their parents' villages. They like visiting Ramallah and Jerusalem and that sort of thing. Does that mean that they would leave everything that they know in the United States and go to Palestine? Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, I doubt it. But you know, there is this really visceral connection to the homeland.
In 2003, I started living and working in the occupied West Bank and began writing articles for websites like the Electronic Intifada. I later became friends with its director, Ali Abu Nima, who advocates for a one-state solution to end the conflict.
Good. I tried looking in the window, but I couldn't find you.
Oh. Intifada had all the connotations, not just of people protesting or throwing stones against heavily armed, troops in their towns and cities, but the idea of cultural resistance, cultural revival, standing up to power. The reason Palestinian voices are excluded are the same reason that historically African American voices have been excluded in this country. It's about marginalizing people who don't have power.
I went to Ali's home to talk about his family's experience being forced to flee in 1948 and about growing up as a child of refugees.
Ali Abu Nima, A-L-I-A-B-U-N-I-M-A-H. That's what you want, right?
So what is home for you?
I hate that question. I never know how to answer it. Home is where I live in Chicago. Home is where my parents are in Jordan. Home is where my parents came from in Palestine. So home can mean many things, but I've always been a little bit jealous of people who have a simple answer to that question, and you won't meet many Palestinians who have a simple answer to it. Palestine is home, but it's unattainable for so many people. What happened in 1947-48 was the destruction of Palestine as people knew it, the end of a way of life, the end of communities that had existed for generations and generations, and the beginning of a life of exile and dispersion that exists to this day.
After returning from the occupied West Bank, I became close to Palestinians living in Chicago, including people like Masada, who owns a popular falafel restaurant where I worked.
Ramadan Kareem.
الله أكرم علينا عليك إن شاء الله.
أنت صايمة؟
الحمد لله.
برافو.
تفضل افطروا عنا.
إن شاء الله.
تفضل على الإفطار. عم 8 الإفطار.
Masada and her family live in Logan Square, where they are turning their house into another restaurant, named for Masada herself. They celebrated Ramadan by breaking the fast with an iftar dinner.
Shadi, this is awesome. Yeah? You have a downstairs too?
Why do you break the fast with a date, though?
If you eat one date, this is good, all day. They used to eat one date in the desert and ride the camel all day. You heard about Muhammad Assaf?
Of course, the whole world heard about Muhammad Assaf. Mohammed Asaf is a Palestinian refugee from Gaza who won the popular talent show Arab Idol earlier this year. He managed to make it out of the siege on the Gaza Strip in order to reach the competition.
We were all crying when he gave his speech after he won.
8 million people. No president get that much vote.
So you opened Sultan's Market, the restaurant here.
I came, I don't know anything. I learned how to speak English, I learned how to swim, to ride a bike, to drive, to work, and make money. That's the hard one. I was like this back then, if you want it.
How did we meet though?
I guess you're looking for a job, or who brought you? You asked for food for Mukhayyam Balata. I remember.
I was bringing kids from Balata refugee camp in the West Bank on a tour of the United States because they were photographers. And we had an event, and I asked if you wanted to donate food to that event, I believe.
Yahudi, not Yahudi, to me, I don't care. So we all the same, man. We all people. Actually,
they probably won't even know what to feel.
We are cousin, you know. Strange cousin.
This is the really poor part of the South Side. It's one of the most dangerous areas of the United States in that it has one of the highest rates of gun-related homicides. When black folks from the South Side talk about not having opportunities, you can see there's very little in terms of development. Here's where the Palestinian community, when it first came to Chicago, it came to the southwest side here. They made money, and a lot of them have moved out into the suburbs. Some in the Palestinian community in Chicago have been involved in political activism for Palestinian rights back home. My friend, Hatem, runs the Arab American Action Network.
If you're a Zionist, then you support the notion that an American Jew from New York has more right to live in Palestine than your father, than my father. The United States supports Israel with $4 billion a year. How do we help our people back home win their liberation? Is maybe to change some minds here. Spread awareness, do protests, raise money for humanitarian aid, that sort of thing. In 2010, the FBI came to my home.
Hatem and other members of the AAAN have been targets of an FBI investigation, which Hatem believes is a way to silence their activism.
We understand it's an uphill battle, but we're making a lot of progress in the last few years.
Hatem and I were at the same rally where my mom told me that I was no longer her son. I asked him if he remembered it.
I don't know if she was at the rally.
I don't know.
That's what it was. Yeah, that's right. She was cheering on the Zionists.
Yeah.
And her son was on the anti-Zionist side.
Yeah, I think that's
what happened.
That's what we suspect happened.
She saw you on your bike with your flag.
Yeah. I got a phone call.
You got a phone call, okay.
While I was riding the bike, saying, Matt, put that bad word flag down now.
Really?
I never told you that.
Oh my goodness. No, you did tell me, but that was a long time ago.
She was really upset.
And that's what you consider the day you were disowned?
Well, I was disowned. She said, that flag is everything that I'm against. And, she said, well, you're not my son, you're not your grandparents' grandson.
Wow. And what about your mom today?
We talk. Hatem believes that the real power to change minds about the conflict in Israel-Palestine lies in community organizing and exposure to Palestinian culture.
More people learned about Palestine and about the occupation from the writing of one poem and the publishing of one song than maybe our work here in 10 years. It was only after we incorporated hip-hop instruction and creative writing into our youth program that we were able to start doing the political work that we could do with them.
Many grassroots organizations, like the Arab American Action Network, are focused on bringing the Palestinian narrative to the American public to challenge the United States' long-standing support for Israel. I wanted to know why the U.S. is so steadfast in its support for Israel, so I went to the University of Chicago to talk with John Mearsheimer, a professor of political science. He, along with his colleague Stephen Walt, wrote a controversial book called The Israel Lobby, in which they look at pro-Israel interest groups and the effect they have on U.S. foreign policy.
The Israel Lobby is essentially an interest group. It's an interest group that's comprised of some American Jews, not all American Jews by any means, and a good number of non-Jews, especially Christian evangelicals, or what we sometimes call Christian Zionists.
How influential is it exactly?
The Israel lobby is one of the 2 or 3 most powerful interest groups in the United States. Every American president since the first George Bush has been in favor of creating a Palestinian state. But because of the lobby, it's impossible for any president, including President Obama, to put pressure on Israel to stop building settlements and to allow the Palestinians to have their own state. There is nothing wrong with creating a powerful interest group. Their behavior is as American as apple pie.
I wanted to see for myself how the lobby influences America's foreign policy, so I went to Washington.
It's extremely important for people to talk to their members of Congress in the House and the Senate to tell us as elected representatives what's on their minds and how this country should be run.
The Zionist Organization of America holds its annual advocacy mission to Capitol Hill in the U.S. Senate building. More than a dozen members of Congress from both houses came to speak at the ZOA lobbying event and show their support for Israel.
A bunch of them, they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "ZOA." And they said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, because the ZOA was the only organization that supported my amendment saying no more money to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt."
You are seeing one member of Congress after another come to this microphone to tell you in no uncertain terms, we will be there for Israel.
Another annual lobbying event in Washington, held by Christians United for Israel, drew thousands of attendees to the convention center.
God gave them the land by what right? By right of ownership. He owned it. He could give it to anyone he desired to, and he gave it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their children forever. He doesn't care what the United Nations thinks, what the Soviet Union thinks, what the Quartet thinks, what the White House thinks. The land belongs to the Jewish people.
After filming the event for most of the day inside the convention center, my colleague was grabbed on the street outside, detained, and had his footage taken by private security hired by QFI. What was it that QFI didn't want people to see?
Mr. Speaker, a nuclear Iran is one of our biggest national security threats and the #1 existential threat to our ally, the Democratic Jewish State of Israel.
Both the ZOA and QFI were lobbying for a bill to increase sanctions on Iran. The resolution passed almost unanimously in the House of Representatives, 1 week before a more moderate Iranian president was to take office. From what I saw in Washington, the Israel lobby has a strong presence and influence with legislators. But not everyone believes that the power of the lobby is insurmountable.
The lobby is very powerful, but it's not the 800-pound gorilla that's literally planted in the halls of the State Department and the White House, forbidding American policy from changing. And those who exaggerate its power actually play right into its hands.
Dan Fleshler is an author and member of the advisory council of J Street, a liberal pro-Israel lobbying organization, recently formed to challenge more conservative lobbying groups.
So why do we see U.S. politicians while they're campaigning, even President Obama before he was elected, why do we see them coming out and making statements very supportive of Israel?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Is that not the lobby?
Well, it's fear. It's fear that money will go pour into the coffers of their opponents. It's fear that they'll be criticized.
So how can we pressure the American government to change its policy with regard to Israel?
I think it's a question of mobilizing and persuading and encouraging the American government that this is what is needed for fundamental justice. This is what is needed also for Israel's sake.
Can you
Well, I
elaborate
think
on that?
the occupation has been both a moral and a strategic disaster for Israel. And it is going to lead to the destruction of the Jewish state unless it ends.
How do you define yourself? Are you pro-Israel? Are you a Zionist?
Well, I don't know what Zionism means anymore. It means, it's one of these words that's lost any meaning. I consider myself very much pro-Israel in the sense that I believe that the Jewish people need a homeland of their own and a place of refuge, even in today's world.
Don't you think it's kind of hard for people from my generation especially to kind of grasp the idea of a state for only one people, that is Israel?
It's harder and harder as the memory of the extreme anti-Semitism of the 20th century recedes farther and farther away. My role as an American Jew is to fix what's broken there. But I don't think my role is to demolish the whole premise of the Jewish state. I don't accept that.
Dan Fleshler is fighting to preserve Zionism and Israel. But for some, Zionism itself is the problem. Philip Weiss runs a pro-Palestinian news website called Mondo Weiss out of his home north of New York City. He started the site because he found it hard to publish progressive views on Israel-Palestine in the mainstream U.S. media.
I don't think I'm that radical. I just think I'm a liberal, and I'm trying to rescue American Jewish tradition, restore us to some of our ideals.
This is the Mondo Weiss HQ. Very cool.
Someone who is critical of the American-Israel relationship is generally relegated to the blogosphere or to British publications. The internet is more demanding than any other form of journalism I've been in. And I've been in journalism 30, 40 years. And I spend an unfortunate amount of time, a lot of time here. In documenting what's happening in Israel and Palestine, there's now a lot of competition. As a journalist, that's all I've ever pushed for is greater coverage of, a lot of the atrocities, and I really think that's happening in a big way. So,
what does it mean to be a Zionist today?
Zionism is, as Mazim Komsia has said, it's getting as much land with as few non-Jews on it as possible. That is the absolute operating system of Zionism from the start. There were idealistic things about Zionism. I want to embrace aspects of Zionism in rejecting it. If I had been in Central Europe in the 19-teens or the turn of the century or 1920, I think I might well have been a Zionist. There were real conditions that created Zionism. Those conditions are over in Europe, they are over in the United States, and Zionism is an anachronism. The cake is baked, it's occupation and ethnic cleansing. Let's end Zionism.
Dan Fleshler raised concerns that the rhetoric of some on the left demonizes Israel, which he says makes it harder for others to criticize Israel's actions. Philip Weiss doesn't agree.
Was the Jim Crow South demonized in the North? Yeah, we demonized it. There are atrocities happening in Israel and Palestine, and we're going to demonize the regime that allows that to happen, that allows ethnic cleansing. It's an important part of this. Delegitimization is explaining what is going on. I will never apologize for apartheid or support for apartheid. Never. I will oppose it, and I will bear witness against it. That's my duty. That is what I owe the Palestinians, to come back to the people who are complicit in that and say no. That identification of Zionism and Judaism in the United States is breaking up, and it's just it couldn't happen too soon. It's just a wonderful movement that I am participating in.
I've always felt that the most important thing for Americans to understand about what's happening in Israel-Palestine is for them to look critically at the narratives they hold about the conflict, and most importantly, to see what's happening from the Palestinian perspective. I'm headed to the Middle East to retrace my experience there and talk to Palestinians about their stories.